senator for so long, forgive me if I call you senator again. I know it's director now. You've been director of the Bureau. Do we call it Bureau?
The Bureau of Pardon
Bureau
Parole. We're
of Pardons
separate
and
from the
Paroles.
board, yeah.
Okay. Now going on to 2 years. This is your second year?
This is my end of my first year. I finished December 7th. Governor Ivey swore me in on December 7th of last year. Or 2020, I should say. So I'm now 1 year and 1 month or 2 months into it.
Okay. Well, you know, we live in a 50-50 world these days, so you've got one of the hardest jobs in government, which means, to me, it means you're dealing with convicted felons. So you have to try to satisfy people who are the victims as well as people who have families who are incarcerated.
Correct.
And that's got to be a very difficult task.
It is. You know, the biggest job I have, because as my job as director, a member of the governor's cabinet, I don't have a say in who gets granted parole, who gets denied. But once you get out, then my job is to supervise and make sure you don't go back in. And in Alabama, that's about 44,000 people on probation and parole today that I have to supervise. So it's as you say, it can be challenging, to put it mildly.
Right. Well, looking back, I know that a year ago when you went into the office, you said that there needs to be a more balanced approach to making parole decisions, and that the parole board should not be retrying every case. I know those words you recall, and I know that you also said that one of the Bureau's biggest roles should be re-entry back into society.
I believe that if we can reduce recidivism, in Alabama, recidivism rate's about 30%. That means if you went to prison within 3 years after you got out, you committed a new crime. I'd like to see us reduce that dramatically, and we can do that with the proper programming.
Well, I also noticed, and just in review and preparation for today, that you said a few months ago, I know you've been faced with the COVID challenge and trying to have parole hearings, and that they've had a lot of them had to been virtual hearings. But I also noticed that you were having as many as 30 hearings a day. Correct.
The board right now that we submit, so what happens is, as director of the Bureau, we send over names of people who are eligible to be heard for parole. Doesn't mean they're going to get parole, but they're eligible to be heard. We've amped that up dramatically to about 30 people a day that we send over who are eligible, and then the board makes a consideration one way or the other as to whether or not they grant or deny.
Well, 30 hearings a day, 4 days a week, that's pretty substantial workload.
Well, yeah, it is, but those are people who are eligible, so, and then the board gets to decide they want to grant them or not. But in addition to that, not only do you send them over there, but you have to research their files so that the board has all the necessary information as to whether or not they're going to vote to grant or deny. They need all the information they can, so that involves parole hearings, that involves interviews, that involves making sure victim notification has occurred. All those are statutory requirements before they even get in front of the board.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk to you today about things that are good that you've been able to accomplish since you've taken this job, and then I want to talk to you about some of the challenges that you're still facing with everything that's going on in the world today.
Sure.
But tell me first, just what brings you into Bibb County today with all the things you got?
So we have the Bureau of Pardon and Parole. We have 64 field offices that oversees folks who are on parole. So, for example, it can be as small as a place like Bibb County, where we have several hundred people who are on probation and parole that we oversee. I stop by the office and see the local parole officers. 90% of the 830 people that work for us are law enforcement, so they're out in the field. I try to go around to every office I can to hear what they're seeing. You know, what all do they need to help get them the support they need. But then also we're talking today about the Perry County acquisition, which we made, which is an old prison in Perry County that we've purchased, not to have as a prison, but to use as a rehabilitation center for those who are already out on parole, but that maybe need some drug treatment, job training, or mental health services. So that kind of brought me up here today just to see some of our local officers and what they're doing and what they're confronted with.
Is that Perry County facility operational?
Yes. Well, it's empty right now, but it's up and running. I mean, it's a turnkey. It was built in 2006, which is actually younger than any prison in Alabama. The second youngest prison would be the one here in Brent, which was built in 1995, 96. So the Perry County facility is actually much more modern, but it can be used for something besides a prison, which is what we're going to do.
What are you going to do? What are the programs that you'll be running in Perry County?
So so we're thinking outside the box. Perry County's always been kind of a mystery. When I was in the legislature, the mystery was, what can you do with that? It was too far away to really use as a good prison facility. What we started looking at was, what if we turned it into a center, whereas opposed to filling up county jails with people who failed the drug test while on parole, or had a technical violation, not a new crime, but a technical violation, as opposed to filling up our county jails, what if we use this as a place to provide mental health treatment for those who have a diagnosis? Substance abuse, alcohol, drugs, what can we do there to have those programs in place? And then finally, job training, which means, how do we train them to do welding? How do we train them to do HVAC repair? Electricians. I'm hearing more and more from private industries out there. They go, golly, I wish I had me some good workers who had these skills, because right now there's just not enough of them. That's what we want to do with Perry County. And it holds up to 730 people. I doubt we'd ever have that many people there, but imagine if we had the opportunity for people, one, to get the help they need so they don't commit a crime, but two, they get a job and can help fill some of the labor shortages. You know what's amazing to me? The data shows right now, people that go through those treatment and get a job within 3 years, recidivism rate drops from 30% to 3% in Alabama. That's a win for everybody. That means less crime.
So the idea is that technical violators, instead of going back to prison, get sent to a facility. They can give them job training.
And substance abuse, which is typically the problem. Yeah.
Okay. And that leads to a job with a skill. Right. And that skill is sponsored, or their job's waiting.
Yeah, what we've done is we've actually had several private organizations reach out to us and say, hey, we have manufacturing facility, or we have some sort of plant here in this area. We really need some workers. And then what happens is the private industry gets to interview them. If they want to hire them, they can. If they don't have to. But we've seen a lot of private organizations reach out to us and say, we want to hire some of these folks.
Okay. So all of these programs are they offered through a technical college or a community college?
Alabama's
or a career
unique.
center?
Yeah, Alabama's unique, and the Bureau of Pardon and Parole, we actually have a partnership with them. Alabama's unique in that we're the only state in the United States that has a technical college solely dedicated to those who are currently or formerly incarcerated, and that's Ingham State Technical College. We have an agreement with them, and we're working now on several grants and expansions of their job training. It works because already around the state we have what's called day reporting centers, DRCs. These DRCs, 11 of them operated by Pardon and Parole, are already doing this on a miniature scale. Perry County, though, would kind of take it up to the next level, almost like a day reporting center 2.0.
And what is a day reporting
center? A day
center?
reporting center, unlike a parole officer, right now if you're on parole traditionally, there's an office here in Centreville. Someone on parole goes to that office, they check in, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, they get drug tested, paperwork's filed. A day reporting center is a little different. In addition to those services, what you have actual drug treatment therapy, you have mental health treatment, you also have job training programs, you have re-entry programs. So it's a little bit different for those on parole. It almost amps up the services they get. Right now in Alabama we have 11, but now Perry County would be the largest of its kind. The closest one to here is actually in Tuscaloosa.
Is there such thing as electronic day reporting where they can report without leaving the job?
Yeah, and that's something we're working on now with the employers. What I want to do, technology's changed so much because the legislature gave us an appropriation to actually do electronic monitoring. The old days that the vision was electronic monitoring was always an ankle monitor. Mm-hmm. Today you can actually do that through your smartphone or through your smartwatch, right, and you can actually check in that way. That's a program we're trying to implement now so that an employer, you don't have, so let's just say I'm for example, working at a job in Brent, Alabama. If my report in is at, say, Perry County or over in Tuscaloosa even, That's going to cost me 2 hours of work time to leave my job just to go check in. So yes, we're working on a program now that would allow people to check in electronically. Now that doesn't remove them or resolve them from the drug testing,
Right.
but that's a random thing that can be done first thing in the morning before they go to work.
Or the employer could be
Yeah,
responsible.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
But what I would like to do, actually, since we drug test them already, is for us to do the drug testing. That way it saves the employer a cost. They don't have to do it. We can do it for them, and we share the results with them.
Okay, that sounds good. Those are things that are progressive, that accomplish a lot of the remove a lot of the hurdles for employment.
Yeah, let's get them a job. And what I have found is if you resolve the underlying issue of substance abuse, underlying mental health issue, and they get a job, the best part is they don't commit crime. That's a win. To me, that's the best criminal justice measure we could ever ask for.
Right. One of the things that we hear most often as an obstacle to gaining employment, keeping employment, staying out of prison or out of trouble is the removal of the felony or removal of the record or parole. Not only parole, but pardons. Being able to get a pardon or to have a clean record.
Yeah, it's an expungement. And we actually passed, I sponsored a bill a few years. It didn't quite get there. The year I left, they passed an expungement bill for certain crimes. You know, at the end of the day, that is a hurdle. There are a lot of hurdles out there, and that's one of the hurdles. But I will tell you this, the folks that are out there on parole now, we have a lot of private businesses coming to us saying we need electricians, we need welders, we need HVAC repair. They're coming to us knowing that the people they're wanting to interview, they know they have a crime. You'll find that a lot of folks who've committed crime are actually some of your best workers, depending on what their background is. If it's a serial felon, probably not. But the guy who committed one felony oftentimes ends up being a good worker. That's why so many private businesses are calling saying, "Man, I'd love to hire somebody who wants to work." I think expungement is something that you need to go further on. You need to be able to expunge further records, because even a pardon by itself doesn't expunge your record. It just says the state has finally forgiven you for the crimes you committed. But I do think you could go further in expungement. But I don't think right now with the program we're trying to do in Perry County, that's going to be a prohibition on them getting a good job.
Okay. Well, what are your thoughts on one of the other hot topics of the day, which is bail reform? We hear a lot of people who feel that bail is too difficult to obtain, and others who say that bail is not difficult enough for violent crime.
Yeah, I served on a couple of national law committees on this, and I will tell you this: there's got to be a happy medium. There are some groups out there that, quite honestly, I think are too far to the left, and they say, let's just do away with bail. If you do away with bail, law enforcement no longer has a tool to hold you accountable until you actually have your trial. So you've got to have some form of bail. I think, is it excessive in certain circumstances? Yes. However, I've seen certain murder cases that happened in Montgomery County. This is when I was in the legislature, that honestly bail was too easy to get. I think that debate's going to go on forever, but I think there's a crowd out there that wants to do away with bail altogether, and I personally believe that would be terrible for public safety.
Well, we all know that bail often some of the worst publicized crimes are committed while out on bail.
That's correct.
So,
and that's just it. Maybe sometimes it's too easy to get bail. And there was a bill I passed when I was in the legislature and fought for, where there are certain crimes you shouldn't be able to get bail. There are certain people who are out on bail for murder or for rape, and they're allowed to get an easy bail, and they don't have to come back. And they end up skipping bail and committing a crime while they're out. So there's certain times people should be denied bail. Now, there is a constitutional requirement that you cannot charge, excessive bail. But I think that's been interpreted to say, it depends on the crime itself. But no, I think the big debate is you're having a crowd out there that's pushing you to do away with bail. And I think that would be a huge mistake. You got to have bail for public safety.
Well, absolutely not. I certainly agree with you on that. Now, I looked over what is anticipated to be legislative agenda items that are expected to be on the 2022 legislative agenda coming up. And they include a lot of things, but they don't seem to include an expectation that there's going to be anything on there about sentencing reform coming up. Do you have any
I
thoughts
think,
on that?
I think the legislature's done a lot already on sentencing reform. I mean, they've kind of done as much as you can, because what most sentencing reform up until now has dealt with is nonviolent offenders. Mm-hmm. How do you handle the drug possession kind of stuff? I don't see an appetite for that with the legislature, and I don't see that being part of the agenda as far as any kind of sentencing changes. I do think there's more improvements we can make with Department of Corrections and pardon parole that we can do internally that doesn't require legislation. But I don't anticipate the legislature taking on any more sentencing reform anytime soon.
All right. Any thoughts from you at the present time about the state's difficulty with the Department of Justice and all of the publicity about the lawsuits over the prison situation?
They've got some challenges. One of the biggest challenges is, recently Judge Hobson issued a 600-page plus report stating that they've got to do a better job of hiring more staff. It's kind of been a chicken and egg deal, because you can't hire staff who wanted to work in some of these facilities because they're so dangerous. But then, they're going to spend the money to buy the new facility, build the 3 new facilities, which, by the way, I think they need to do. But until they're built, you can't pay enough. No one wants that job. That's the toughest law enforcement job in Alabama. And so they're going to have to spend a lot of money to meet the judge's order to comply with hiring by 2025. But it's going to require a lot of money to hire these officers, good, qualified officers who want to be there in what has to be the most dangerous job in the state government.
Absolutely. I don't know how that's going to be resolved.
I will say this: go look back at newspapers from the 1980s, and they talk about Alabama's prison crisis. This is just one of those things. It's cyclical, and we continue to always have a problem with it. The big issue is we have small state budgets. Lawmakers, what do they want to do? Well, what makes people at home happy? Schools, roads. That's popular. Going out and saying, "Hey, by the way, vote for me because I'm going to fix prisons," doesn't really fit on the bumper sticker very well. It doesn't sell.
Exactly right.
And that's just the way. It's not just Alabama; it's every state. It's political, and so it's a lower priority.
Well, I'd like to get your thoughts on some of the criticism of the parole board's activities in the area of reforms.
Mm-hmm.
Just to get your comments. The critics of the parole board's accomplishments or lack of them have said this recently about the parole board's report for the last year. Recently, AL.com reported that the rate of paroles granted to state prison inmates by the Board of Pardons and Paroles dropped 15% during the last fiscal year, the 3rd straight year of decline. The 3-member board granted parole for 648 inmates and turned down 3,584 during the fiscal year that ended September 30th. This was less than half the average of 37% for the previous 10 years. Critics of the decline in paroles say the board is not following its own guidelines and not giving enough information about why it denies parole. Any comments?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to get myself in trouble here because the board doesn't work for me and I don't work for them.
Right.
So, but I will say this, as someone who's studied this while I was in the legislature and now as being director of the Bureau, I would say, one, they actually follow the law as far as how they're granting and denying, and the evidence they have to state why they granted and denied. Now, we may not agree with why they denied, but as far as stating why, they're actually following the statute. The issue is in Alabama, the statute is so broad that the board basically has complete and utter discretion to follow the guidelines or not follow the guidelines. Me personally, my opinion, if you're going to have guidelines, follow them. If you're not going to follow them, why you have them? So I do think there needs to be some more adherence to the guidelines. And again, that's up to that 3-member board who's appointed by the governor, confirmed by the legislature. I would say, though, that they're following the statute. They're following what the law says. Now, if we don't like the law and the way it's being, it's worded, change the law.
Well, I agree with that. And you said previously that it would take legislation to give more weight to the guidelines.
Yeah, you have guidelines, but they're completely voluntary. I mean, the statute says the board shall be allowed to determine, how and when they grant, deny. And it's a bit of an interesting organization in that I am the second director only who doesn't. Used to in the old days, I worked for the board and carried out all their functions. Now I'm a member of the governor's cabinet, separate from the board. It creates a bit of an interesting dynamic in that I actually am involved in helping them come up with guidelines. But the statute in Alabama says they do not have to follow them. So if we don't like they're not following them, change statute.
Right. Well, one of the chief critics of the board is Representative England out of Tuscaloosa, who's chairman of another party, and he says that there's racial disparity in how the board operates. Of course, my question is, will there be a push for a change in legislation?
Well, I'm sure there will be, but now I will say this. I actually pulled some data because I was curious about that myself on the racial disparity.
Right.
This percentage of racial disparity that occurs in grants of parole is the exact same today, actually slightly lower than it was in 1999 when Governor Siegelman was in office. Right. It's been that way for the last 20 to at least 30 years. And it's not just Alabama. I agree with you, there's a racial disparity in the grant rates, but there's also a racial disparity in arrest rates, conviction rates. That's a national deal. It's not just Alabama. And whether it's African Americans or in Oklahoma where it's Native Americans, there's a disparity there. I don't think any of us had the answer to that, but I'm not sure what legislation he could pass that would resolve that either.
I don't think there's a magic bullet for that either.
It's a national issue, and it's debated. It's debated a lot among national policymakers. I don't think anyone has the answer to it. I certainly don't. I agree with him. The data shows there's one there, but it didn't just start in the last few years. It's gone on for decades.
Okay, well then, you've answered all the questions I had for you today, prepared for you. Is there anything else you want to talk about today?
I just think Perry County type facilities, if we do it right and we're able to service that many people on parole, it gives us a huge chance to reduce recidivism. So like I said, right now in Alabama it's about 30%. That's right in the middle nationally. But everything that's ever been shown, every piece of data shows that if they get a job and get the underlying issue resolved, it drops like 3%.
Well, I agree with you because I was excited when I heard the news of what they were going to do with that facility. And I know you were instrumental in making that happen.
That was part of the prison construction bond issue. They
Right.
put the money in there for us to buy it. This was the first time this kind of plan was floated. The legislature bought into it, and I think we're really going to have something that we can look at and go, we ought to do this more around the state.
One of the things that Chris England said in Tuscaloosa, and I think he's right on the button, and I know you'll agree with this, is that and you referred to it earlier, everybody who's trying to get a pardon or everybody who's trying to get go through the process of trying to get out of incarceration, what they want is a job, and what they want is skill training, and what they want is the ability to make a living, and they need a job skill. And the key to unlock that success is the ability to have a job skill and to be free of encumbrance. And that is the key to it.
Had a guy the other day in South Alabama down near Mobile. He came up to me. I was at a local parole meeting event down there, and they said, why don't you introduce this fella? The fella comes up, and he'd been in prison. He was a drug addict. And he says, I've been in prison twice. Got out on parole, got my drug treatment, went through a welding program. He went through a welding program, now makes 6 figures. Has been clean for over a decade. This guy is what you want. He's got over $100,000 a year he's making. He's not committing crime. He's not on drugs. That, to me, you want to talk criminal justice reform? That's the best kind of reform we can offer right there.
That's reform plus employers who are willing to overlook that box.
We have a lot of manufacturers in the Black Belt area who've told me, they said, boy, they need electricians. They need people who can fix stuff. And we don't have enough of that because we're so focused as a state on college anyway. We're not focusing enough on these skilled. And you have people on parole saying, I really want to get a job. Get them a job, they can pay their bills. There's no need to commit a crime. And it just works.
Well, I appreciate you coming here today and giving us your time to talk about these issues. It means a lot to Bibb County to have you here and to know that you're working on our behalf.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm always glad to be back down here. I remember when I first ran for the House, 2002, I came to this very building to turn in. Back then, you didn't email stuff. You just wrote a press release and brought it by. So it's been a while, but it's always great to be back here again.
But anytime you're here, you let us know, and we'll talk to you and find out what's going on.
Look forward to it, Mike.
All right.
Thank you for having me back.
All right, man. Thank you.